Welcome to the Leader-Post Rider Rumblings podcast. This is episode number 161. Taylor Shire and Darrell Davis alongside with you to chat about the Saskatchewan Roughriders as we are now officially into the CFL preseason with the Riders set to take on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers on Saturday over in Manitoba. And Darrell, feels like it's been a sort of a long off season, but we are finally able to talk about a game, although it means nothing in the standings wise. Football is sort of officially back in the province.
Yeah, we get to see a lot of the Saskatchewan Roughriders and Winnipeg Blue Bombers because the schedule is really strange this year that the Roughriders play back-to-back preseason games against Winnipeg and then meet them 3 times in the regular season. That's great. That's the team they have to compare themselves against, right? Whether Winnipeg wins the West or is at least competitive in the West, the Roughriders have to prove that they're capable of getting past the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. So I'm looking forward to the season in that regard, and looking forward to the first preseason game too, Taylor. We've got some obviously a couple of question marks, but it's a pretty well established roster. I don't think we have a lot of places that we're going to say, oh boy, they're worried. That's a worrisome spot for them. So that's a good sign for the Roughriders.
Yeah, they're basically through 2 weeks of training camp up in Saskatoon. After this weekend's game, they're going to move back to Regina for the final week of training camp and then play that final preseason game against the Blue Bombers the following Friday. So in terms of, what we need to see from this team in the preseason game against Winnipeg, obviously they don't need a victory. It's not these massive 2 points. What do you need to see from this team in this first preseason game, which typically we don't see a lot of starters. We don't see a lot of the veterans. It's more of the rookies, especially on the road. The rookies trying to showcase what they have. And I don't know what Winnipeg's going to do yet, but what do you need to see from Saskatchewan?
Yeah, it is a different philosophy, isn't it, for road games and home games, especially when the Riders play their second game at home. Then you'll probably see their starters a little bit more. I can't imagine them playing them very much at all. They want to find out, how's backup quarterback Jake Maier? What about Tommy Stevens? Can he run the offense, right? Because they're both behind Trevor Harris, the starter, who's going to be 39. So you have to make sure that those guys can play. Trevor Harris has been hurt the last 2 seasons. So they have to check out those guys. And we're always watching quarterbacks. I keep thinking it might be the deepest quarterback room in the league, Taylor, when you think about 2 and 3, Tommy Stevens, an unstoppable force. And Jake Maier has started 45 games, CFL games for the Calgary Stampeders before joining the Roughriders. So those are the things that everybody watches, right? The fans and the media and the players, and because it's the easiest one to pay attention to. But there might be some juggling on that offensive line too. Losing Sean McEwen, their free agent center in training camp. It looks like Philippe Gagnon, one of the other free agent acquisitions, it might be injured. So how are they going to juggle that offensive line? So I think we might see a bit of that starting unit together as they try to figure out who's going to play guard, who's going to play center, and do they really want to go with 3 offensive linemen from the United States, from 3 Americans, which would change their ratio a little bit. So those are the 2 main things I'll be watching for in the preseason game, Taylor.
Yeah, and after cutting Noah Zare, they've brought him back along the offensive line, and I think that speaks to the level of injury. I think specifically to Sean McEwen, where they need another Canadian back in the room. I don't necessarily think Zare is going to be a starter, but he'll definitely be a depth guy that will probably stick around based on the extent of the injury. And we talked about it last week or a couple weeks ago on the sort of reintroduction of the Rider Rumblings podcast for this season, but the depth that they have at offensive line is impressive. So when you have a couple of injuries, it's not that big of a deal. When you start to get to 6, 7, 8 injuries like they had last year, then it turns into be a big deal. But they've addressed that this offseason by bringing in a number of guys, and you lose your all-star center, and sure, it's a drop-off, but you do have guys in-house who can easily fill that void. They can't necessarily play up to what McEwen is capable of playing at, but they can fill that void. Logan Ferland played a lot of center last year when Peter Godber was hurt. I think he's more valuable at guard, especially because he can flip around if there's ever an injury or tackle, and you don't have to bring in a center. So I think they're going to try Zach Fry at center, which gives him a chance to play. And as you said, Jacob Brammer, an American, getting a lot of reps at guard throughout camp, where he did play last year. He obviously did play some tackle as well, but if you have the flexibility, which they do because they are starting 3 Canadians at receiver with Del Duncan Busby alongside Sam Emelis and Kean Schaefer-Baker, you have that flexibility. You could also flip that and easily plug in a guy like Zare or a couple of younger guys who who have looked good at camp in making some headlines. So they have options, and I think that's the best case scenario for this team when you're dealing with injuries. When you lose this all-star center, you're left with no options. They have a ton of options, and I think that sort of leaves them in a good spot. They've almost prepared for this, in a sense.
Well, they prepared for it last year quite a bit, didn't they? What did we figure? Didn't we count that? They had 16 offensive linemen. That counts Micah Johnson, who played defensive line a little bit, and Miles Brown, I think, did a little bit too. So we added 2, but they ran out of offensive linemen. They only dress 1 extra during a regular season game. So sometimes it gets a little bit panicky on the sidelines. So the fact that they had 16 guys who played that position and still didn't have a horrible offensive line, it's pretty impressive. It speaks highly to the coaching staff and the recruiting that they've done, and it's helped them this year. They have Jamarcus Hardrick back at right tackle. Losing him early in the season last year really shot them down. He was one of their spiritual leaders too, right? And obviously a good offensive lineman. But it allowed them to find guys like Brammer and make sure that Trevion Tate can play. They had Trevor Reed starting at left tackle, played the whole season, then gets hurt at the end of the year, goes down to Minnesota's camp in the NFL and gets released on an injury release. So we asked Jeremy O'Day, the general manager, earlier this offseason if Reed might come back, and it doesn't sound like it. He might be too seriously injured to come back, which is sad for him because what a great player he is and was last season. But they have been able to find other guys there. So I know it's not always the most glamorous position, but it's maybe one of the most important positions. And as you and I sit and ponder what they're going to do, they're doing the same thing, right? Where are we going to play this guy? Logan Furling could be one of the best centers in the league, but is he more valuable at guard? Can you use him at tackle? Yes, you can. Having people like that make this team a lot stronger. And I still think that they're going to have to figure out where they're playing everybody. But your point about the 3 Americans helps, makes it easier to replace players too. But they can do it because they have good Canadian talent in other places, especially at receiver, but also in the defensive backfield.
Yeah, Tavon Campbell is obviously on track to start at cornerback. Nelson Lacombo at safety, and that really is their defense. I know they do have the flexibility to play A.J. Allen at linebacker, another Canadian, so that could eventually flip the ratio if they ever needed to play that position. But I think they're in a good shape ratio-wise heading into the season. But in terms of expectations for the preseason, I do also want to watch the quarterbacks. How is Tommy Stevens when he throws the ball versus how he runs the ball? We know what he can do with his legs, but what can he do with his arms? And can he run the offense at a pinch? And will Jack Cohn get any opportunities to make his case to move up? There's no spot for him on the depth chart. So that to me is I don't know if it's a storyline to watch, but because to me, he's just going to be on the practice roster. And is he willing to accept that? And after being sort of the third stringer last year, there's not a lot of movement that's going to happen in terms of the quarterbacking depth chart based on what I've seen and the makeup of these 4 guys. So versus last year, we had that sort of camp competition. Who's going to be the number 2? That was kind of the big storyline, right? Shea Patterson eventually won the number 2 spot, and Jack Cohn was sort of that number 3 rookie coming in. But he's, I think, going to take a step down on the depth chart based on the guys that they brought in this year. But one of the positions I'm excited to watch is that sort of backup running back spot. Mario Anderson and Trent Penix will be the 2 guys that I'll be keeping an eye on. And they're sort of, a running back is sort of an easy position to watch in the preseason. You see a guy have a big game, get a bunch of carries and break some tackles. You get there's sort of some buzz around him, right? So those are 2 guys I'm going to watch, because one of those guys to me is going to be cut, and one of those guys is probably going to make the practice roster. Again, they don't usually dress 2 Canadian running backs, but you do need that backup running back to fill that void. Or if they somehow find a way to work him in on special teams, that might be an option as well. But Thomas Bertrand-Hudon to me is the backup running back, and then they'll have this American potentially headed to the practice roster. But I always like to see the playmakers in action during the preseason, and I guess that would also speak to the receivers as well.
Yeah, we probably aren't going to see starting tailback AJ Oled very much in the preseason. Yeah. The smaller, lighter version of him, and he told me he's still a power back, you know that he'll generate a lot of power from his new shape. He's smaller and lighter, but he can still run. But you're right. I don't think we're going to see him much. And why would you take a risk with your high-priced starting tailback who got hurt last season? I think you're just going to let him rest most of the way through the preseason. You know what you've got in him, and hopefully he performs the way he expects to this season.
Yeah, and again, leading to the playmakers, there's a few receivers to keep an eye on. But again, I think my second storyline to watch is the return game. How much will Mario Alford play? They know what they have in him. I don't necessarily think he's progressing in his career. I think he's sort of falling off a little bit. We saw that last year. But if he's healthy, he's had a good offseason, maybe he takes a few more chances and tries to break a few earlier in the season. Or does he?
We wondered about him quite a bit last year. We had on this podcast, right? Yeah. We talked about him a lot, running out of bounds and just not fighting for those extra yards, which that's what returners are supposed to do. And we didn't see that from Mario Alford last year. So I was surprised they even brought him back, to be honest. I guess they're giving him another opportunity, but I thought that they would go with newer, younger, and somebody who's really going to fight for that upfield yardage. And if he doesn't do that right in the preseason, then I think it's time to move on and find a new returner.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I don't know how many opportunities he's going to get to return the ball. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, but I think they will try new guys. I think Dante Myers will get an opportunity to return a few kicks. There's a few other guys, but that to me is the second storyline to watch, because I think that spot is up for grabs. If somebody has an impressive preseason and they've had a good camp, well, then they're going to be the primary returner who can also potentially be used on offense. And I know Dante Myers might not start based on potentially Sean Bain coming back, so he might not be a starter long-term. I don't know the update on Sean Bain Jr. I don't think one has been provided in terms of his recovery, so how long is he going to be out? But Dante Myers would be sort of that second American, in my opinion, to start alongside Keyshawn Johnson in the receiving core. So do you have a starting receiver also being your primary returner? Probably not, but potentially I think you could do that.
Yeah, you want to rest those guys quite often, right? And that's why most teams have a returner who's a backup somewhere else in the offense or the defense. So that might be the best way. Dante Myers is having a good camp though, right? So maybe he earns that starting spot and that plays him right out of being the main returner. You mentioned Sean Bain Jr. He's put him on the veterans injury list, so that means they're waiting for him, and hopefully he's okay. Can he return to the speed and the proficiency that he showed a couple of years ago? That's a question mark too. So that receiving core is solid with its Canadians. I know that everybody's high on Keyshawn Johnson and Dante Myers. I still think they're going to be pushed, right? Robustelli's back. Joe Robustelli, who was here last year, having a pretty decent camp. So maybe there might be some changes on that, and maybe that's how they can platoon them, right? Keep Robustelli on the roster, and then let Myers be the returner and come in sometimes to play offense. There's lots of different ways that they could do it, but that return game does need some work. I think we've hit on a topic there, Taylor, that we're going to be watching a little bit, and it's often a forgotten spot until you realize, you know what, we're not getting very good field position anymore. So I think that's one that we can watch, and how it plays out with the starter roles too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we talked about it last podcast, but I don't think there's a lot of starting spots up for grabs as we move over to the defense. I don't really see any guys pushing to make their case to be a starter. I think everybody's sort of penciled in, potentially along the defensive line. If there's a really good American edge rusher who has a couple of sacks in the preseason and makes a name for himself, then maybe there's a spot to back up the starters that they have. But to me, the defense is pretty set, so it'll be interesting to see how they platoon everybody.
How do you see the front four?
Well, Mike Rose and Micah Johnson, obviously, and then Shane Ray and Malik Carney to me are the starting ends, and until they get passed by somebody else, and that's where the preseason does come into play. If Shane Ray, Malik Carney has sort of but I think those are two veterans, and they've proven themselves long enough that they haven't lost their starting spot for week one. I think they're week one starters, but they can be pushed by younger guys. And obviously injuries do happen. So all these positions need depth, and who are those going to guys be that are going to fill those depth spots? I think we will decide that in the preseason.
Yeah, true enough. I see it the same way as you do, because those are the veterans, and those are the guys, when you watch the practices, those are the guys who start with the first team. So that's the most likely one. They do rotate quite a bit. So they keep 6, sometimes 7 defensive linemen on the game day roster. So watching who they rotate in, and maybe somebody moves along and all of a sudden progresses past some of those veterans. But that's a pretty solid crew. I know it's a veteran crew. Carney's probably the youngest of the group, and I guess he could be passed. I think that they have high hopes for him, and when he plays pretty well. So that he might be the one with the longest career ahead of him, because those other guys might be pushed because of it. But that seems to be the starting front four. Coaches love experience. Corey Mace is in charge of that group. He's got the experience that he wants along that front four. And we're going to see in the preseason who the backups are, because as you said, they're all veterans. Why play veterans in the preseason if you know that they're going to be your starters?
Yeah, you've got with Micah Johnson and Mike Rose, and speaking of that, I'll be interested to watch Ali Saad. They spent a first-round draft pick on getting this guy from Bowling Green. So does he come in and can he be that interior defensive tackle when he's usually played edge in college? So what does he look like? They obviously are high on him. Charbel DeBeer coming back from an injury. He had a great start to last year and then got hurt and missed the whole season. So does he pick up where he left off, and can he be that rotational guy? I think Caleb Sanders is a perfect rotational guy. He's probably a starter in his own right anywhere else, Caleb Sanders, and so certainly effective in that rotation alongside Johnson and Rose. So I think they have a really good depth at defensive tackle. I assume all those guys, they dress a lot of defensive linemen. I assume all those guys can make the active roster and deserve to make the active roster. So obviously we'll have to be deployed on special teams as well.
Yep. They do like the rotation, right? A couple of years, how many years? Maybe a decade or so ago, teams started adding defensive linemen to their active roster, just so you can rotate those guys. Micah Johnson, as well as he plays, still needs a break once in a while. Mm-hmm. Even he, I think, after last year, is starting to admit a little bit that he doesn't. I remember before the start of last year, I don't want to miss a play, he said. But as the season wore on, you could see that he wasn't angry about being rotated in. He still played the majority of the snaps, and what a great season he had for how old is he and how many years has he been around. But just keeping those guys fresh is so important. It's funny to me that offensive linemen never change, that if they can use that front five over and over and over again, they do. And by the end of the game, quite often, because your defensive line have been rotating, they're fresher and even more vibrant, and they often make big plays against tired offensive line. So that's what the Roughriders really plan on doing. They don't do a lot of real tricks up front, but they do push hard, and that's what he demands, and that's why he keeps 7, maybe even 8 defensive linemen, right? Depending on how they play it a little bit and who the guys are that make the squad. So, watching them and seeing the pressure they get without very many blitzes. Teams don't blitz very often in the preseason either. So not that Corey Mace blitzes a whole lot anyway. Let's just see the pressure that they can put on. And I want to see Ali Saad as well. You're right. He played a 3-man edge on a 3-man front at Bowling Green. Can he play inside? He's built like an inside lineman. So, but they seem to think that he can do both. And if he can, he could have a future in this league.
Yeah, lots to watch for as the Riders take on the Bombers on Saturday at 2:00. And the game is on CFL Plus, I believe. I don't think it's on TSN. So we'll have to stream it and watch it and enjoy it and analyze it after, because like you said, there's lots of storylines to watch. So that's the Riders' first preseason game. There's already been one preseason game in the CFL. So let's go around the CFL a little bit, specifically in the West Division. Calgary beat BC in the first preseason game. A lot of starters didn't play over there as well, but we did see PJ Walker, I guess, make his CFL debut, and the former NFLer helped Calgary, I guess, get the win. I didn't watch much of the game, but it wasn't overly riveting.
No, and the reports come out, it was a pretty boring game, which preseason games can be. You have to understand that they serve more of a purpose than they're for the players to put themselves on video so that the coaches can see them and the coaches get to go analyze them. So they don't care how boring it is. They just want to earn their stripes, I guess. And the fact that it was on Vancouver Island, the second game in 2 years, like they played a regular season game on the island last year, doing it there. Amor Doman, the BC Lions owner, wants to make sure that the Vancouver Island residents are part of the BC Lions, because they are the BC Lions. They're not the Vancouver Lions. It's like Saskatchewan. They draw from all over, and that's what Doman wants to do with his Lions. He brings people in from the Kamloops, Kelowna, Vernon. He's providing buses and different ways to get people in. The BC Lions are one of the hotter teams in the league in terms of interest, right? Because Rourke have Canadian quarterback, so the way they're spreading their roots around, that's a great thing. The fact they lost, well, it's a preseason game, and we'll see how they do in the regular season. I think they're a pretty competitive team. I would say that they're, if Rourke plays as well as he should be able to play quarterback, they're the third place team in the West at the moment, right? If you're asking, I think Saskatchewan's the best team. I think Winnipeg still is probably number 2, and I think the BC Lions will be number 3. And meanwhile, the Alberta teams will be trying to improve, but still need some work.
Yeah, I agree with that. Saskatchewan, this is their division this year, but saying that they still need to go and beat Winnipeg. They need to go through Winnipeg in order to claim the top spot. So it's Winnipeg's division right now, I guess I'll say, until Saskatchewan goes through Winnipeg, is able to beat Winnipeg in Winnipeg, which I think would be a big accomplishment to go in there in the Boundary Bowl and beat them. And then we'll see how the playoffs shake out. But I think they'll have to go through them at some point in the playoffs in order to get to that Grey Cup game where they obviously want to be.
And remember, Winnipeg starts its first game without quarterback Zach Collaros because he doesn't answer emails or texts. So he didn't do his CCES anti-doping test. Didn't answer the testers. That's such a funny reason, isn't it, Taylor? That do you have all your texts up to date and your emails? Do you answer them all?
I do, yep. But if there's an unknown caller, I don't know if I'm going to be answering it.
Yeah, but you check your message after, though, right?
I'll check my message out. So yeah,
that's funny. Zach Collaros had a bit of a point, though. He was in the Taylor Swift stuff, right? Because he and Collaros and the Kelceys are good friends, right? They go back to college days, and with Travis Kelce dating Taylor Swift, he was caught in the middle of that, and he said he was getting phone calls galore, so he wasn't answering his calls as much. So it's a believable excuse, but you still, when you're a pro athlete, there has to be a way for them to reach you, and you better be responsible enough to answer their calls.
Yeah. Interesting storyline, something to watch for sure. But I'm going to go back to the West Division, and obviously, BC and Calgary. That to me is a great, not the preseason, but that's going to be a great storyline when they play Vernon Adams against the team that sort of let him go and traded him away. He's obviously going to be out to prove himself against his former team. Will Nathan Rourke be the quarterback that he was in 2022 before heading to the NFL? And in Edmonton, Trey Ford. This is his team, his chance to start. I think they're going to make some noise this year. And if they don't, they have a pretty good backup in Cody Fajardo, who can easily be a starter in his own right. So I think there's lots to watch. I think Saskatchewan and Winnipeg will be the teams to beat this year, with those other 3 battling for that third and final playoff spot.
When's the last time we picked Saskatchewan to be first in the West?
Really? I can't remember. Maybe 13. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe. And I can't remember them being this strong, or at least projected to be this strong, right? It's played on the field, but when you look at it, what they did, they filled a couple of holes that needed to be filled, and kept most of the roster intact. And they had a pretty decent team. I think their coaches have improved a lot. I think the overall feeling, being at training camp, the overall feeling of the team, the closeness of it, you could build. We all saw that very clearly last year. I think it's fortified 2 or 3 times over again this season. So that has a lot to do with it. I think that the way they play for each other, so that makes them, and they're pretty talented, so that makes them a real contender.
All right, that does it for episode number 161 of the Rider Rumblings podcast. Darrell, thanks as always for joining, and enjoy the preseason game on Saturday.
See you at Mosaic.